Hello everyone, this is the video of Legal Studies, Class 12, Unit 1st, namely Judiciary, and the topic is Judicial Review. In this video, I will be discussing everything about Judicial Review, such as the meaning and concept of Judicial Review, its historical background, that is how it is evolved, and the grounds of implementing or applying the concept of Judicial Review in the country, and what are the topics that is covered under the heading of Judicial Review. So, we have certain topics covered under the heading of Judicial Review. Let's begin with the concept of Judicial Review. What exactly it is? The judiciary is concerned as the guardian of the Constitution on the mandates of rule of law by protecting the rights and liberties of individuals and limiting the government within its sphere. The role of the judicial institution conventionally and popularly is to adjudicate and resolve the disputes of both the type, that is criminal as well as civil. But this convention has been broken by the American jurist John Marshall by adding the judges are not only interpreters but also lawmakers through their activist approach. This is how the concept of judicial review evolved. So, this concept is simply saying that conventionally the role of judiciary was to adjudicate the case and resolve the disputes. But over a period in time, the concept changed and so many things added up, especially when the democratic kind of governance is evolved. So, the concept rule of law is implemented. Under the rule of law, what is that? That is the rule not by the monarch or any such person, rather by law. So, under this concept, the power of any of the government is limited and supervised by or guided by the constitution basically. So, as the constitution evolved, similarly the concept of judicial review evolved, that is on the concept of separation of power, and the person who was behind this to evolve this concept was John Marshall. He was the Chief Justice of Supreme Court of United States and he just gave the concept of judicial review, which was not a constitutional provision before his interpretation. So, this is the concept of judicial review. However, take some other points about the judicial review. That is, exclusively used in the constitutional law, judicial review literally means the revision of the decree or sentence of an inferior court by a superior court, and it works through the review as prescribed by the laws of land. So, this provision is simply saying that the role of judicial review is to review the judgments of the lower courts by the higher courts. But over a period in time, its jurisdiction kept on increasing however, over a period in time, the jurisdiction of judicial review kept on increasing and it became one of the most essential provisions or weapons in the hands of judiciary to limit legislature and executives powers, especially whenever they try to cross their limit or overuse their powers. Therefore, any point in time, if judiciary finds that the legislature's actions or newly made rules are inconsistent with the constitution, then it has the power to declare them unconstitutional and hence void. So, if any point in time legislature makes the law which is contrary to the constitution, then judiciary has given the power under the heading of judicial review to review that provision and declare that unconstitutional. So, this is the beauty of judicial review and this is the concept basically of judicial review. Further, in many of the countries including the United States, France, Canada, India, etc., Judicial review powers allows the court to invalidate or nullify the law of the act of the legislature or executive if they are found to be contrary to the Constitution. However, in the United Kingdom, the scope of judicial review is limited as the court has no authority to nullify or invalidate the Parliament's legislation or other such action. As we have discussed here that judicial review has tremendous power even to declare legislature's action or legislation as unconstitutional. But this provision is not across the world. Rather, as the country's example given here, France, United States, even in India, it has too much power. But the country like United Kingdom, the scope of judicial review is limited. Their Supreme Court cannot declare something made by Parliament as unconstitutional or void. Now, let's check out its historical background. Though the concept of judicial review was not explicitly described by Montesquieu. Do you remember Montesquieu? In 11th, we have discussed about him that he was the person who given the idea of separation of power. So, same thing staying here. When he was defined the idea of separation of powers, but the United States Constitution, which was developed on the concept of Montesquieu's separation of powers, not in the beginning. Just pay attention here, not in the beginning. Because the Constitution of the United States drafted in 1787. But at that point in time, the concept of judicial review was not there. Later, in Marbury versus Madison case, John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, institutionalized the concept of judicial review. From that time, the concept of judicial review spread across the globe, especially in those countries which have federal constitution and function on the concept of rule of law, that is supremacy of law. Here we have used the term federal constitution. What does it mean? As we have studied even in our 11th class that the federal means separation. That is basically separation of power, federal government, we have studied that. Similarly, federal constitution, the constitution has defined the powers among the different organs of the government. And we have three organs of the government, that is executive, legislature and judiciary. So, power is divided accordingly and it functions under the rule of law, that is supremacy of law. Now, let's check out what are the grounds of judicial review. Now, you must have the question, what is the meaning of grounds of judicial review? Grounds basically for judiciary it is an opportunity when it can use or you can say on what basis you can use the doctrine of judicial review. So, let's check it out. The concept of judicial review functions on the two concepts. The first one, as we have discussed, that is rule of law, that is constitutionalism, and separation of powers, that is maintaining the federal characteristic of the constitution. I believe now you can appreciate all these terms because earlier we have discussed all these terms. So now check it out what other provisions. Please pay attention here. Until these two concepts are maintained, what are those two concepts? That is rule of law and separation of powers. There is no scope of judicial review. But the moment any of them is breached, the scope of judicial review arises. As this provision saying, until rule of law and separation of powers, these two concepts are maintained, means if the different organs of the government, they are working in harmony and in their sphere or perimeter, then judiciary has no role or there no right to apply the concept of judicial review. But the moment either executive or legislature exceeds its power, then judiciary can apply the concept of judicial review. Following are some of the specific grounds to apply the provision of judicial review. So now let's check out what are those grounds on which judicial review can be applied. The first one is illegality. What does it mean? Whenever any administrative body exercises its power beyond its limit, as we have discussed just now, separation of power, it is ultra vires or simply illegal. Secondly, if law-making body makes any such provision which doesn't fall under the mandates of the Constitution, it is illegal, and judiciary can come into picture with the concept of judicial review. The second one is irrationality. You must be thinking, what is irrationality? Irrationality means any decision, any policy or any action, though legal, please pay attention, though legal, but against the interests of public at large, it is considered as irrational or unreasonable. Hence, in such a condition, under the provision of judicial review, judiciary can take action against such decision or action. I believe still you might have some confusion regarding this point, that is irrationality, as I have discussed that even the law and the action is legal, but it is against the interests of society at large. Means government has implemented or has taken certain action that is damaging the interest of public at large. It may be anything. So in that condition, judiciary can apply the concept of judicial review and make that action or that provision unconstitutional. The third ground is procedural impropriety. This is another difficult term to understand, but don't worry. For every administrative, legislative or even judicial action or work, a proper procedure is defined by the law. As we know that even for a small thing there is a rule to be followed. So for any action, for any application or anything you can imagine, there is some rule to be followed. Similarly, even government has to follow certain rules, as it is the country of rule of law. Hence, if it is not followed as per the provision established by law, then it falls under the category of procedural impropriety. It means before making decision, the respective law and provision need to be followed. So whatever the action government takes, it needs to follow the procedure, the law, the rules mandated by the Constitution and other such provision. So if it doesn't follow that, then judiciary can again apply the concept of judicial review. There is one more point that need to be followed here under the heading of procedural impropriety, that is, a man must not be judge in his own case. What does it mean? That if you are at fault, then you won't be the person who is supposed to be deciding whether you are at fault or not. It must be decided by someone else. So this is the first rule. The second one is, hear the other side. Means if someone is complaining to you about someone, it's not like based on his statement you are taking action against that person. Rather, you need to also hear that person. So until you listen both of them, you cannot decide anything. So both the persons have to be heard properly, and based on that you can make decision. So for the procedural impropriety, these two mandates must be followed. Likewise, as we have seen here that there are three grounds of judicial review. The first one is illegality, the second one is irrationality, and the third one is procedural impropriety. So we have three grounds to apply the judicial review concept. Now we have the last topic of this video is what is the topic covered under judicial review. Though we have discussed so many points, and the point that I am going to discuss here, that is not like that I am going to discuss here. Already we have discussed that while defining the concept of judicial review. That is, without understanding the concept of separation of powers, remember we have discussed already, it is really difficult to appreciate the concept of judicial review. The concept of separation of powers, which was first introduced by whom? It's Montesquieu, remember, a French judge and political philosopher. His concept of separation of power is based on the idea that no branch of government should be able to exert power over any other branch without due process of law. Just now try to correlate with other concept. While discussing the grounds of judicial review, we have discussed this concept. However, if the government taking action under the concept of due process of law, then judiciary has hardly any opportunity to apply the concept of judicial review. Each branch of the government should have a check on the powers of other branches of the government, thus creating a regulating balance among all branches of government. Remember the concept of separation of powers. What does it mean? That all three organs of the government has been given their power to regulate that. But any point in time, if anyone tries to exceed that or even try to escape that, in both the conditions, judiciary can apply the concept of judicial review. The key of this concept is check and balances. Therefore, the concept of judicial review is considered as key check on the powers of the legislature and executive, the branches of government by the judiciary. So, this is all for the concept of judicial review. I believe, though this is the complex concept, I tried to make as simple as you can understand clearly. However, if you have any confusion, I repeat, just go through this video again, because if you just miss any point, you won't able to appreciate the concept of judicial review. So you have to understand certain points in order to understand the concept of judicial review. That is the separation of powers, that is the most essential point before understanding the judicial review. So first understand the concept of separation of powers, because the concept of judicial review is derived from the concept of separation of powers. So this is all for this video. See you in next video.